At 10:45 on the night of October 3rd, 1974, Memphis police officers Elton Hyman and Leslie Wright were dispatched to respond to a report of a break-in.
Officer Hyman went to take a look at the back of the house. It was dark, but Hyman could see someone run across the backyard. With a flashlight, he could see the person's arms and hands, and later said that he figured the person was unarmed. Hyman called out, "Police, halt." But the suspected burglar began to climb the backyard fence. Hyman responded by shooting the fleeing burglar in the back of the head with his .38 caliber pistol. The escaping burglar was named Edward Eugene Garner. Garner was 5'4", weighed about 110 pounds, and was 15 years old. He was an 8th grader. Police recovered $10 and a purse from his body. Garner was unarmed. He had no weapons at all, and he later died on the operating table. And Hyman was no rogue officer. He was following the law. At the time, Tennessee law allowed the police to use all necessary means to stop someone from fleeing from an arrest.
Tennessee law allowed police officers to do that even if the person fleeing posed no threat to anyone.
And there were a number of states at the time that allowed the police to do the exact same thing. Garner's father filed a civil rights lawsuit against the Memphis Police Department. The lawsuit argued that the state law had violated his son's Fourth Amendment rights.
The Fourth Amendment includes the right to be secure from unreasonable searches and seizure. In this case, the seizure is the taking of life.
In 1985, the United States Supreme Court agreed with the Garner family. Justice White, who wrote the opinion for the court, said, "The use of deadly force to prevent the escape of all felony suspects, whatever the circumstances, is constitutionally unreasonable. It is not better that all felony suspects die than that they escape." On February 14th of this year, 17 students and school employees were killed at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. Lawmakers and the public are asking how best to prevent another deadly mass shooting. One proposal, endorsed by President Trump in a tweet, includes arming public school teachers.
What the Constitution says about the rules of deadly force and how that pertains to Trump's idiotic proposal to arm teachers. I'm not even going to pretend here. On this, the final episode of Season 2 of Trump Gone Law. Let's do it. This is What Trump Can Teach Us About Con Law, an ongoing series of indefinite length where we take the tweets of the 45th President of the United States and use them to examine our rights in the Constitution like we never have before, like the right of school children to not be shot by teachers. That's a new con law hypothetical for you. Our music is from Doomtree Records. Our neighbor and professor is Elizabeth Joe, and I'm your fellow student and host, Roman Mars. Are you hiring? Every business needs great people and a better way to find them. Something better than posting your job online and just praying for the right people to see it. ZipRecruiter revolutionized hiring. Their technology finds great candidates for you. It learns what you're looking for, identifies people with the right experience, and invites them to apply to your job. Right now, my listeners can try it for free at ZipRecruiter.com/conlaw. That's ZipRecruiter.com/conlaw. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire.
On August 9th, 2014, a police officer in Ferguson, Missouri fatally shot Michael Brown, an unarmed civilian. Brown's death drew protests and national attention to the police use of lethal force against civilians, especially when they are unarmed. But the topic of lethal force by the police isn't new, and it's not an aberration. The power of the police to use force is basically what policing is. A firearm is a standard piece of equipment issued to American police officers. So even though only about a quarter of police officers ever fire their job-issued guns while on the job, the fact that police officers carry them means that lethal force is always a possibility. And so the Supreme Court has had a lot to say about that. And this is why police rules on deadly force come from the Fourth Amendment. The Fourth Amendment of the Constitution prohibits the government from conducting unreasonable searches and seizures, So when you think of a search or a seizure, you might think of a search as when the police look through your car and a seizure as an arrest, and you'd be right. But lethal force is governed by the same rules. A police officer using deadly force and actually killing someone is the ultimate governmental seizure. That's why the Supreme Court has decided to rely on the Fourth Amendment to think about what the police can and can't do when it comes to deadly force.
Let's return to the fatal shooting of 15-year-old Edward Garner that we mentioned in the beginning of the episode.
In 1985, the Supreme Court said that police officers could not be allowed to use deadly force to prevent everyone from fleeing an arrest, no matter what. That was constitutionally unreasonable. The decision doesn't prohibit the police from using deadly force. Instead, in the Garner case, the court said that if a police officer believed that the suspect posed a serious threat, physical threat, to the officers or to other people, it was okay to use deadly force. Garner's case did not fall in that category. And that standard, being able to use deadly force in some circumstances, gives a lot of leeway to the police. It's not hard to understand why a police officer should be able to use deadly force, or even less than deadly force, when a suspect appears to pose a threat. But the Supreme Court has made it clear that the police also can get the benefit of the doubt when they make mistakes about whether to use force or not. Just 4 years after the Garner decision, the Supreme Court reviewed the case of a man who suffered a broken foot, cuts, and bruises at the hands of the Charlotte, North Carolina police. Why? Because when they saw the man run out of a convenience store, they thought he'd been shoplifting. Well, DeThorne Graham did run out of the convenience store, but he'd done so because he was a diabetic and he was having an insulin reaction. He thought he'd go to the store for some orange juice, but the line was too long. When he decided to hurry to his friend's house for help, Graham was stopped by the police. In 1989, the Supreme Court didn't resolve whether the police were justified in doing what they did to Graham, but it did set out the standard. The court said that police officers in these circumstances should be judged under a legal standard of objective reasonableness. And you measure that based on what a reasonable officer would do at the time, not in hindsight. And the Supreme Court pointed out something else important here, too. Police officers face some very stressful circumstances. Whether a police officer used a reasonable amount of force, said the court, should account for the fact that police officers are often forced to make split-second judgments. So the result has been a pretty deferential standard to the police, and that includes cases where the police have made mistakes, even fatal mistakes. There are numerous legal cases where police have encountered a person and believe that that person has a gun, only to find out later that the gun wasn't a gun at all, but a wallet or a shiny object. What matters in the Fourth Amendment sense is, was it reasonable at the time for the officer to believe there was a danger there? And mistakes on the part of the police don't necessarily violate your rights. So in a sense, our system has struck this balance because we know police officers will sometimes be in dangerous situations, and we want to allow them to protect themselves and the public when they think it's necessary.
So keep that in mind. The law allows for police officers to make deadly mistakes based on whether the force seemed reasonable during the heightened stress of the situation. Now let's get closer to the present day.
On February 14th of this year, a 19-year-old former student walked into a high school in Parkland, Florida, with firearms and began to shoot. 17 students and school employees died as a result, and several were seriously injured. Since the shooting, a group of student survivors has taken to social media calling for action. They have argued for stricter regulations on the availability of semi-automatic AR-15 rifles, like the one used in the Parkland shooting.
Trump had other ideas.
At a White House listening session with parents, teachers, and students on February 21st, Trump stated, "And one possible solution, which may not be very popular, would be to have people in the school, teachers, administrators, who have volunteered to have a firearm safely locked in the classroom, who are given training throughout the year. And if it's not the teachers, you could have people that work on the campus. A custodian could be an undercover policeman. Someone who works in the library or the lunchroom could be an undercover policeman. He serves lunch every day, but he also has a firearm at the ready." That idea was reported widely. The next day, Trump issued a long series of tweets. I never said give teachers guns like was stated on fake news, CNN, and NBC. What I said was to look at the possibility of giving concealed guns to gun-adept teachers with military or special training experience. Only the best. 20% of teachers, a lot, would now be able to immediately fire back if a savage sicko came to a school with bad intentions. Highly trained teachers would also serve as a deterrent to the cowards that do this. For more assets at much less cost than guards, a gun-free school is a magnet for bad people. Attacks would end, all caps. If a potential sicko shooter knows that a school has a large number of very weapons-talented teachers and others who will be instantly shooting, the sicko will never attack that school. Cowards won't go there. Problem solved. Must be offensive. Defense alone won't work. History shows that a school shooting lasts, on average, 3 minutes. It takes police and first responders approximately 5 to 8 minutes to get to site of crime. Highly trained, gun-adept teachers/coaches would solve the problem instantly before police arrive. Great deterrent. 2 days later, Trump tweeted again, armed educators and trusted people who work within a school love our students and will protect them. Very smart people. Must be firearms adept and have annual training. Should get yearly bonus. Shootings will not happen. A big and very inexpensive deterrent. Up to states. And on February 26th, President Trump had a meeting with state governors.
This is a quote from Trump speaking in the third person about himself.
The headline was Trump wants all teachers to have guns. Trump wants teachers to have guns. I don't want teachers to have guns. I want highly trained people that have a natural talent, like hitting a baseball or hitting a golf ball or putting. And then there were reports that the Broward County Sheriff deputy assigned to the school had failed to run into the school for several minutes after the shooting had started. Trump responded by saying that he himself would have gone in, quote, even if I didn't have a weapon, and I think most of the people in this room would have done that too. Press Secretary Sarah Sanders clarified Trump's statement later in the day. She said, President Trump, when he said earlier that he'd have run into the school, he didn't really mean that he'd run into a school with an active shooter, but rather he'd be a leader. So what if we armed all or just some of the more than 3 million public school teachers in the country? What if? Well, even though we usually think of the police when we think of the Fourth Amendment, that part of the Constitution applies to all government action. So, for instance, that's why the Supreme Court has decided a number of Fourth Amendment cases involving schools, such as drug testing in public schools and backpack searches. These are all forms of government action. So if public school teachers were officially carrying guns as a part of their job, they'd be subjected to the Fourth Amendment too. So let's consider the best case scenario. Assuming there was a person posing a deadly threat at a school, an officially armed teacher might be able to stop that person with deadly force, and that may well be a reasonable action under the Fourth Amendment. But remember, the Supreme Court has also said, let's not second-guess police officers too much. That flexibility has meant that police officers have made deadly mistakes without violating the Constitution. So what's the worst-case scenario? A teacher who sees a student with something that the teacher can't confirm is a gun, but in a split second, the teacher believes, mistakenly, that it is a gun and fatally shoots a student. If it's an objectively reasonable judgment at the time of the shooting, then presumably no constitutional wrong has happened, even if the student was, say, just reaching for a shiny-looking wallet. Whether or not arming public school teachers is the right policy debate, it's clear that if we decide to arm public school teachers, their decisions to use deadly force raise the same kind of legal questions raised in Edward Garner's death and DeThorne Graham's unfortunate insulin reaction turned forcible stop. We'd have to decide whether those risks, borne already by public police officers, are worth extending to our public schools. And as for Garner's case, it took a decade to reach the Supreme Court. And it took yet another decade to finally end the case, when the city of Memphis agreed to pay the Garner family $300,000. Hyman, the officer who shot Garner, eventually retired as a captain of the Memphis Police Department.
I have some follow-up questions for Elizabeth right after this.
Is any of this, arming teachers, is this in Trump's control at all? Is this a thing that he can actually do anything about?
So remember that Trump said in his tweet, we could arm teachers up to states. And so that actually is insightful in that he seems to recognize in that tweet that the president actually can't just tell public school districts what to do. So that goes back to this basic idea that the federal government can't force state and local governments to adopt things according to federal objectives. That's based on the 10th Amendment's so-called anti-commandeering clause. But what's clear is that if Trump were to convince Congress to pass a federal spending bill, Congress could incentivize states to say, we would like you to arm your public school teachers, and we'll shower you with federal money to do so. That would be allowed. Giving
School teachers guns seems by definition commandeering a force. You know what I mean? Like, that is so strange to me. That is the most commandeering you can commandeer anyone, is to turn your teachers into a police force.
That's true. But the commandeering in this case would mean, it would just be a choice that public school districts could decide, yes, we would like the millions of dollars to arm our own public school teachers, to turn them into a security force in every school. So, yeah, it does seem very strange. And I also think it's important to understand that we always do think of the police and the Fourth Amendment. But these rules would really, unless the states would restrict public school teachers further in the circumstances in which they could shoot people in schools, that those same rules would apply. And so, does it matter on the actual scene of any possible, and let's hope it doesn't happen, mass shooting? No. But what it does do in terms of the law is that it reduces the likelihood that people who have been shot in error and people who believe they've been victims of excessive force can file successful civil rights lawsuits against the people who have shot them. And it makes it exceedingly unlikely that public school teachers, for instance, might be criminally prosecuted if people believe that their use of force was justified. In the same way that it's very uncommon for public police officers to be criminally prosecuted for their use of deadly force. And it's often a big hurdle for plaintiffs to win civil rights lawsuits in these excessive force cases against the police.
If the teachers are acting as a security force in this scenario, does it matter that they are not police officers?
So for Fourth Amendment purposes, the answer, generally speaking, would be no. Because they're public school teachers, they are governmental officials. And the Fourth Amendment really is saying whenever the government is engaging in a search or a seizure, which can happen when you use deadly force, it doesn't matter what your official title is, you're a government official. So that's why even though we think of police officers as doing things like searching for evidence, the Supreme Court's made it clear that if a school administrator goes through a kid's backpack looking for, contraband, cigarettes, right, which aren't allowed in school, then that is something that is regulated by the Fourth Amendment. Even though the school teacher or the principal is not a police officer, it's the same basic idea in terms of, why the Fourth Amendment should regulate this action.
This show is produced by Elizabeth Joe and me, Roman Mars. You can find us online at TrumpConLaw.com, on Facebook and Twitter. All the music in TrumpCon Law is provided by Doomtree Records, the Midwest hip-hop collective. The theme music at the top is from Shredders, and this instrumental right here that you're listening to right now is from the new Dessa album, Chime. Get it, people. You need it. You can find all about Doomtree Records, get merch, and learn about current tours at doomtree.net. We are a proud member of Radiotopia from PRX, supported by listeners just like you. This is our last show for a while. We're going to take several weeks off and see if Trump says anything outrageous on Twitter. Oh my God. This is real life. Oh. Talk soon. Also from Radiotopia, Ear Hustle. It might possibly be the only podcast that matters. Stories of day-to-day life inside San Quentin State Prison, produced and shared by those living it. Season 2 is just starting out, and it's all about firsts, like the first time your mom visits you in prison.
I took a lot of deep breaths. I try to choreograph my hug, because I haven't hugged my mom in a long time, but in the cell. But
wait, how did you practice? How did you choreograph a hug?
so I didn't know, because I haven't hugged someone in a long time. Maybe by then it was 13 years, right? So I didn't know if my hand goes around her shoulder, or her neck. I didn't know if it went like diagonally, like 2 45-degree angles. And then I was like, you know what? I let her lead. Like, this is your mom, right? This is my mom. And I don't know how to hug my mom. So I was nervous about that type of stuff.
Did you actually practice hugging somebody else?
No.
Just like
my cellie wasn't up for that, no.
Subscribe to Ear Hustle now. Find out more at earhustlesq.com or radiotopia.fm. Thanks to AdZerk for providing their ad-serving platform to Radiotopia.
Radiotopia. From